Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time you're watching this podcast. This podcast series we titled Race, Culture, and the Church. Race, Culture, and the Church. And it is my hope, my desire, my intent to hit on all of those topic areas. This podcast series began 1 week after the murder of George Floyd. And we've invited a variety of guests into this space. And I am so pleased and honored that so many have been open to coming in, unscripted, just totally freewheeling, and hopefully revealing in our conversation. But today, I am pleased, I am honored to have Dr. Markisha Webster, EDD. You are the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at our utility, Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you very much. I am pleased to be here today.
I am pleased to have you. We have a lot of guests here that come into this space, as I just said, but I don't think I had as many forewarnings about you that said you really need to talk to her. This is someone you need to present to community and to hopefully unpack in an honoring and revealing way of Dr. Webster's journey. So you've been the director, DEI director since November of 2021. So we're coming up on a 2-year anniversary.
We are.
2 years. 2 years. If you knew then what you know now, you would do it again, right?
I would do it again. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you love what you do.
I love what I do. I've had, I think, the honor, the privilege. It's been a blessing to do what I do. For me, it's personal and professional. And so to go to work every day and to have the conversations that I have, to interact with the people that I do, is truly a joy. Now I got to deal with the other stuff, right?
Sure.
That comes with that. But just if you talk about the body of work, it fills me with a great sense of joy and satisfaction. I feel like I am doing what I was called to do.
I like your use of the words. I don't know if it's intentional or not. Being a doctor, it probably is. But you use the word joy, not happiness.
Yeah, and there's a difference. And I am manifesting things that bring me joy. And so certainly when you think about what you do, your 9 to 5 or whatever those hours in the day look like for you, if it is bringing you joy, then you can't ask for much more than that. And so I'm also encouraging my children as they're getting older, think about the things that bring you joy. So this is one of those things.
Definitely need you to talk to some youth groups. I've shared just, similar words that don't pursue, nothing wrong with pursuing high-paying jobs. That's wonderful. Pursue something that really brings you joy.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't become burdensome, or you start to question and re-question, well, why am I doing this? Bring you joy. I appreciate that. Joy will definitely take you through those times when that 2-hour-long meeting marathon, it's like, okay, I came here for joy. Not too happy right now, but joy comes. Okay, so you came to SMUD. You were recruited to come to SMUD from?
City of Portland. I was actually the director of the Office of Equity and Human Rights in City of Portland. Portland has a very interesting history, politically, socially, racially.
Right.
And so after the murder of George Floyd, things were hot in Oregon, in Portland. And if you watch the news or were paying any attention in terms of protests, those sorts of things, like that was very amplified in Portland at the time. And so I was leading in a time right after George Floyd's murder, and it was very difficult for a lot of reasons. And so, the death threats, it was, folks were not happy about the way in which I was standing up for the Black community and the way that I was in support of, what the mayor was doing and really trying to bring some things together in our city. And so it was a very interesting time for me to lead. I think it elevated me to a level I didn't know that I could go to. And I've been for the last few years pretty unapologetic about the work that I do in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We got the B on there now at SMUD, but I think that moment in time really took me to another level and gave me a different confidence in what I do, that I didn't even know was down in there. I was saying the things that I was feeling personally, and I knew that the community was feeling as well. And so, um, stepping away from that and really coming to Sacramento, it was bittersweet because I really was, I think, sort of at the height of some things in my career there. And so having to weigh that against what was really best for my family. And family comes first, right? My kids, are the center, right? My mother is the center. And so really just sort of being in that battle, but knowing that this was the right decision to make
Mhm.
in coming to Sacramento and
Part
taking
of
this
part of the
this role.
title, and I don't want to read too much
Mm.
into it, but you said diversity, equity, and human rights.
Yeah.
So what was the that's an interesting use of words.
Hmm.
Unpack that for
Yeah,
me.
so in Portland, we had a human rights commission that actually was made up of individuals from across the community, across our region, and the office that I was leading had responsibility for convening that group of people. And so, long before I started at the city of Portland and was doing that work, they were deeply involved in. Issues related to human rights. And there's a creed around human rights. Like there's a whole sort of way in which that work looks, and it's not so localized. It's very global in nature. So a lot of the issues that that commission was bringing to us at the time were not just things happening in Oregon, not just things happening in the U.S. They were things that were happening outside of what would normally we think be our scope
Mhm.
of sort of understanding or influence, if you will. But out of that, I think I really learned to think about the work that I do beyond just the circle that I'm in, that there are larger implications. And this looks different. This work looks different in different parts of the world.
Well, I definitely can see where bringing in, a broader set of issues will help give greater context for what you do, say in this case, Portland. But did you find that looking more broadly actually not only gave context, but gave trajectory, a different trajectory or different outcomes? I don't know what word I'm
Yeah.
even looking for, but to pull in from something bigger, apply it here, how does that get lived out?
I think it forced me for sure, and I won't speak for my team, but at the time, but I think they would probably say too. It made what we were doing here that much more important, right?
Mm.
Like it held a different weight because we're not just looking at this from one perspective. Like we are really thinking about some of these issues at a global level, and that changes the conversation. That changes the direction of how you want to execute on things. And it wasn't always that those big issues came to us, but I think when they did, we had one actually around religion that really, ended up in there being an ordinance of some sort. I can't remember now, like numbers and names and all of that, but it really spoke to this idea around religious freedom and thinking about like what religion means in different contexts across the world.
Mhm.
And for me, that was a stretch, right? Just in full transparency, having, grown up Christian, really just having a firm foundation in that and to have to think outside of that.
Your
Um,
formed theology.
Absolutely. And that was, I think, a good opportunity to think beyond just what is our context and what that means for people that do live around us who may not be from where we are, but have a global view of things in a way that maybe we're not thinking. So,
Interesting. Now, you also use that. Again, I don't want to read too much into it, but I'm listening. It sounds like the pressures of Portland squeezed the juice. That was Dr. Webster.
yeah.
That was grown somewhere, and I understand Ohio.
Yeah. So it's funny how I was a teacher, right? I taught high school English. That is what I went to school
Wow.
for. I love language. I was a voracious reader. I can't remember a time in my childhood. adulthood where I wasn't
A book was
reading
in your
something.
hand.
A book was all. I used to take them to the dinner table. My
What
mom
was the
was like,
series of books? With Nancy Drew stuff? Or?
Babysitter's Club. Let's just
Oh,
call her
wow.
out, right? Like,
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Babysitter's Club all day long, right?
See, I
Like,
was a different generation. It was Hardy Boys for me. So,
but I remember Hardy Boys and Nancy
digress.
Drew.
Yeah.
Like, I've checked them out too. So I think, that knowing what my love was and sort of where my roots started and sort of finding myself even here at SMUD, like that wasn't what I thought. Like I thought I'd be in the classroom teaching, and then I ended up, in teaching in higher ed and became a professor and was sort of on this tenure track. And I was like, this doesn't feel like it, right? And then I found myself in these government spaces, both at the state level and at the local level in Portland.
State of Ohio or state of
This was
Oregon?
all Oregon. This was in Oregon.
Okay.
So as I transitioned, right, from where I was in Houston. So I was in Houston teaching high school English and thought that was it. Right. I love my students. I loved being the senior sponsor, like all of the things that came with that, and also had this yearning for something more. And so that sent me back to school to finish a doctorate degree. And then it was like, now what?
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I never would have thought, right? This PK, this pastor's kid from Dayton, Ohio, would find herself in the spaces that I'm in now. And I think being in Portland, that was supposed to be a part of my journey. And it's sort of like I rediscovered myself at the tail end of my time in Portland. And I knew that as I was rediscovering myself, that how I was positioned professionally wasn't going to work anymore for what I needed to be doing on the other side of things.
I was going to ask, so when Dr. Webster met Dr. Webster, who did you meet?
I met this girl that was, and I say girl, right? That was passionate about people, that was passionate about the things that she was seeing happen in the world, that had been an educator, but also knew that there were flaws like in our education system. Like I shouldn't even say flaws, like it was designed to work for some students and not others, right?
Correct.
So nothing broken, right?
It's performing the way it was designed.
Performing the way it was designed, right? I became more aware of just the impact that my words and the way that I moved had on my children. My children were watching. I remembered that I really love music and I really love art. And these were so many things that I had lost, I think, in a relationship, in a marriage that was abusive, right? I had lost who I was and was taking on this identity. I remember looking at myself one day in the mirror and not really recognizing who that was.
Wow.
And thinking, Lord, like just praying, like there's something different because I don't have the vibrancy. I'm not, the light is gone. And I remember after sort of post all of that, many friends saying like, you have your light back. We've missed that. Where have you been? And I said, I was lost. I don't remember, right? What it was like, at certain points to be who I'd been and just to see that. I'm still discovering what all that means, but I like this version of Dr. Markisha, of Dr. Webster.
Dr. Webster 2.0.
Dr. Webster 2.0. Like she is coming fully into herself. And that is, it's sort of taking all of those loves that I had as a young woman and really translating what that means now to me as a much, not so young woman anymore. And I'm loving that and trying to remind myself of that when I don't always give myself the grace I think that I deserve. So
well said. You mentioned, again, I'm listening. You mentioned you just threw out that 2-letter term PK. Only a PK. What do you mean PK? Preacher's kid. So your father was a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like being a PK?
He spent a lot of time in church. Lots of times. But I will say, like, it was fundamental to shaping. I was teasing you when a little bit before we started, that when you came out to like greet me at the door, like I was like, I got nervous. I was like, I'm coming, Daddy. Wait, let me like get myself together. Like, he's at the door. I had this moment, so I have to call him tonight and be like, I like saw you, a flash of you in just a moment. In that interaction. But it was, it taught me a lot. It was such a firm foundation, I think, for me. I've learned so much about just connecting with people by watching my father do that. And just
In what way? What way?
I think just the way that he cared for people. And not just as members of the congregation, right? But just really knew their stories and knew the things about them beyond just on Sunday, right? When we come together, or Wednesday for Bible study, right? He really knew things about their lives, the things that he could celebrate with them and share when there were challenges. And I watched him support people and really love people in a way that was very authentic. And so I think I've picked up a lot of that from him. And I need to tell him that. I had never told him that. It's the first time I see how you get somebody on a mic and start revealing. It's like a therapy
I'm glad
session.
we can help. This is not actually a therapy session,
It's
but
not, right?
but
Call my dad and tell him that.
but
Yeah.
did you at any point did you feel that, why am I sharing my father with all these folks?
I think there were moments, especially at conference time, but he really did a good job of taking me along, right? To be in those spaces as much as he could. And so I had him so much, right? And when I didn't, or when I was having to share him, it didn't seem as bad, right?
Okay.
Because there were so many moments where I'm tagging along, right? And it's interesting how I do that with my children. They go with me. My daughter's been in classrooms. She was born when I was teaching college. And so, I have pictures of her at the whiteboard with me, right? Like, just being in those spaces. I bring them now, when I can. And it gives a different perspective. I hear her, she doesn't know I overhear her, talking to her friends about what her mother does. And I'm like, oh, okay, she gets it, right? She's getting it right. She's like, my mom talks to people about, race and like how they need to like treat people better.
Is she a tween?
She's 13.
Yeah.
So she just entered teenagehood, and
You are in my prayers. So I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
And then they got an 8-year-old son, and it's a whole different dynamic with that one. So yeah.
Yeah. So bringing it now,
Mhm.
met Dr. Webster before she was Dr. Webster in Ohio, PK. Sounds like your journey took you through Houston, Texas, to Portland, Oregon, to Sacramento. That's pretty good. I mean, really, you've got the Midwest, you've got the South, you've got the whatever Oregon is, the Pacific Northwest, and then California. It's its own thing.
I'm learning.
It just is. I was sharing, I had a conversation with someone and they were talking about cultural differences from Florida to California. It's totally different. I'm just trying to help somebody out. But having said that, what those geographical transition points, pivot points, what has that taught you about? Would you just say people are the same everywhere, or the people? I don't know. I don't even want to put words in your mouth because I can answer a question or answer it in a way that would not reflect you. But any takeaways from the geography travels?
I think it plays a big role in the conversations that happen, the way people navigate their everyday. I will say, certainly in the work that I'm doing in DEI, this would not be a conversation that I could have probably as freely as I've had it in Texas, right? I'll just be fully transparent about that, right?
Sure.
The politics things.
I don't think that's a revelation, but thank you very much for your transparency.
Right?
Yeah.
It would be a very different conversation, and so I think there are some clear lines of division around things. And one thing I'll say this in comparison to when I was in Oregon, you didn't really have to do a lot of guessing, right? In Texas and Louisiana, like there were some clear historical components that still exist. And you sort of,
This is
how
the
you fit.
social and gender lens that
Absolutely.
I see you through, and there's not a whole
And
lot.
it's not,
Yeah.
people are just very open and very, honest about that. And then you transition to a place like Oregon. And I used to say that people are politely racist in Oregon. So it
Hmm.
kind of sneaks up on you like, oh, wait a minute, right? Because it, in certain pockets, had a very liberal feel to it. And again, it's got a very strong history of protest, these sorts of things where folks come and, for whatever social issues, they are there protesting, having the conversations, the marches, like all of that. Um, I just, transitioning from a place that was just like, oh, like right, where you are and sort of how you're situated in this to something that was more subtle was a very interesting transition to make. And it, in a lot of ways, changed the way in which I was doing my work and having my conversation. So I had to do a lot of reading between the lines, and a lot of really understanding microaggressions and just how things show up to be successful, I think, there. To know how to advocate for my child, right? As she was starting school, like just all of those things that would have been very different in a place like Texas.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then coming to California, I think it's been interesting because there's sort of this mix of liberal and conservative that I see that's very like, oh, okay, right? And so in some circles, we're ready to have the conversation, and others, not so much. And really just, I think I've been given the gift to be able to read an audience and to read the room and to know how to tailor the message to really resonate with folks, no matter where they are.
Tailor the message, but not tailor or truncate the objective.
Absolutely. So we're going to still get to the same, like I'm not, changing the objective or changing what the message is, but I know how to bring you along because it, just in sort of that South to, Pacific Northwest transition, coming here and just really sort of doing some assessment has taught me a lot more about the importance of listening and assessing your audience and what's the readiness, I
Okay,
guess is
so
too.
I'm Mr. California. I will stand in that space. I'm on the couch. You're the doctor. Assess me. What in your 2 years here in California? How do you see Ms. California?
I would say, well, let me preface by saying I think being in Sacramento versus maybe a conversation I might have in
Correct.
Oakland
Correct. I'll give you
would be
that.
very
So you only
different.
know what you know. So it's
So
like,
we're
okay, I'm
gonna
talking
keep it
about the universe of people I know in California. Don't
right.
talk about my hometown, Bakersfield. Just weep for me. That's all. That's all.
Oh,
Yeah.
I stopped there on my way to San Diego.
I'm so sorry. Just fill it up and keep moving.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
sorry,
what happened.
Bakersfield.
But I'll just talk in the context of Sacramento. I think that, and I'll use it in comparison to the conversations I was having in Portland, because I think in terms of like population size, probably pretty similar.
Pretty close. Yeah.
Demographically, very different, but just, and Portland probably more, right, racially diverse, ethnically diverse. But just, we'll just say, sort of in those ways in which we're comparing. I think that the conversations I was having in Portland were more advanced in a lot of ways. Now, just because you're saying the thing does not mean that you're doing the thing.
That's interesting. I never would have guessed that
Neither
you're
would
actually
I.
having advanced
They're
conversation.
having advanced conversations, particularly around racial equity. And so coming in and just, very, very open about that, right? I think that there are some laws and some other things in California that I had to get, acquainted with that were different than they were in Oregon and in Portland. So there were programs that you could specify for African Americans, for Latino, like you could, that we're earmarking this money for this community, whether we receive public funds or not. And that is a very different story in California and in
Mhm.
Sacramento, where we
Mhm.
have Prop 209. And so it's been navigating that for me,
Mhm.
sort of seeing how just that the difference in the conversation and the kinds of things that I could do there don't just translate. So you can't just drop them in right here. And so I would say that a lot of the conversation here is on the verge of wanting to be bold, right? Wanting to be progressive. And there are a lot of folks that are really ready to have those conversations. And I think depending on the readiness of your organization or wherever it is that you're working, you've just got to be thoughtful and purposeful about how you move. And so for me, it's been like, I got to slow down a little because again, I'm coming from a place where I'm standing on the tables. Like we're saying the thing and being very unapologetic about it. And sort of stepping into spaces where I'm like, okay, folks aren't quite ready for it to look like this. Let's do some bite-sized chunks, right? And sort of educate and bring folks along so that we can get there. I don't think it's not for want of wanting to be there or a desire to be there in most cases. It's the education component. And we don't know sometimes what we don't know. I mean, there's some people that just don't want to do the work.
Sure.
I'll just name that as well.
So you really believe,
But-
and again, it's not a judgment. I'm trying to hear, you believe, I'm on the couch, you're assessing me. I want to go there, wherever there is, but I don't know how.
I'm not sure. I don't know how. I'm afraid, right?
Okay.
When we start talking about equity in particular, there is a conversation around power and a shifting of power and power dynamics that makes folks nervous. And that's hard, right? That's a hard pivot to have a conversation about the reality of what, where we are, right, in 2023.
Do we have a shared, in your opinion,
Mhm.
and again, I'll disagree with myself, so I know this is pretty tough to say this, but I'll say it anyway. Do we have a generally shared definition, you're an English major, of community?
I don't think so.
So what is community to
And I don't
Dr.
think
Webster?
that's
What is community to Dr. Webster?
community to me is it's a collective. Like collective immediately comes to mind. And so I think about how the skin that I'm in as an African-American woman, as a Black woman, and knowing sort of the origins of a collectivist culture, that we do things in service to others, right? It is not just about me as an individual or how I'm going to benefit from this, but this is about, yeah, that works, right? That's good too. But how is this going to make a difference for my neighbor, for this community, for whoever it is that is a part of that collective? And that is very different than this idea of community that's like, well, we'll just bring people in when we need to kind of hear from them once in a while, right? That's very performative in nature. I think when you are about community is driving the solutions. They are, not just at the table, but they're, preparing the table, right?
That flies in the face of the 1849 gold rush, individualism, John Wayne
bootstraps.
It's like, just I'm my own person.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying that the alternative, the juxtaposition would be to have community that drives the decision making. Let me go out on a limb. I don't think we're there.
I would agree.
It was a very short limb. It was
I can
still reach the trunk. We're not there. I think even, again, I shouldn't even enter into this space, but a lot of the decisions that are made from an individual perspective. Mm-hmm. They're not a community perspective.
No.
How does this benefit me or my very small constituent group?
I'll take it even drill down a little bit further. Like we operate in cultures of white supremacy, and it's not like you are a white supremacist. Let me clarify that because people get in their feelings about that. But this is the way that we operate. It's the way that, we've been conditioned. It's the water that we drink, the food that we eat. And so, and folks of color, right, are guilty of operating in ways that support white supremacy. And so I think when you are operating from that mindset, right, the sort of ways of being that, were the origins of our country as we know it. And to your point, right, bootstrap, like all the things, like to shift and to begin to think about how a collective drives something is a huge paradigm shift. That's big. And I think not so big if we think just insular around like Black community, right? Latino communities, like we've operated in the collective, and I think that obviously being in the larger sort of dominant culture, even we've gotten away from like what community means. But if we think back to our roots, like we have each other's backs. One of our community agreements on my team is I got your back. Right now, you may say something that's out of pocket in the public, but we're not going to talk about that there. We're going to go back, right? I'm going to have your back in that moment. And then we can have the family conversation on the side, but that we have each other's backs. Like we are supportive of one another, that we are, creating the table and, driving the solutions that we know are going to work best for the problems that we're experiencing. And so that's what it means to Dr. Webster.
Well, and I've gotten the double high sign from our incredible podcast guy, Drew Escobar, that I have to wrap up. One of the earlier conversations that I had with a theologian that came into, we're all theologians, but he was a theologian, came into the space. He said that sometimes we're not even aware of how we're operating because how we operate is fueled by the air that we breathe. And I thought that was so profound in its simplicity that we don't think about, we just accept that the air is breathable until it's not. Then you have those air alerts. Stay indoors, don't, I think that'll preach. Actually, I didn't intend that, but that'll preach that even in our community, we assume that we have community until we get those alerts, whatever those look like, and then we can't breathe that air. That's we need to respond in ways that probably aren't very productive. Let me just say that. So I need to wrap up, but I'd be remiss if I didn't. So where is Dr. Webster going at SMUD? Where is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? Where are we going? Give me the 60-second version of where we're going.
So I think we are focused collectively on our 2030 vision. And I think, our CEO says all the time, and I'm so happy he does, that that's the vision. But how we get there is through diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so for me, that is the charge. That is my directive to continue to lead our strategy in DEIB, to continue to engage with community internally, externally. It is looking at recruitment, retention, promotion, hiring, like just what a trajectory in a career at SMUD looks like, what those opportunities mean for the community, to change the economics of what happens in our community. It is about making sure that our employees feel a sense of belonging, that they can show up as their authentic selves and not have that be judged or not feel like they, don't belong or not accepted because they are who they are. And that's all around our culture work. And I'm excited because I think, we're in a good place at SMUD to drive this. And I feel just blessed to be able to do what I'm doing every day. So we got big things in store.
Well, I will speak for me. I am blessed to have, I'm 2 years late, but to have met Dr. Markisha Webster. I welcome you 2 years late to welcome you to Sacramento. Again, if there's anything, I say this, and I mean this sincerely to all our guests, but particularly to Dr. Webster, if there's anything that we can do to help you in your endeavors, especially in building community, let us know. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being in this space, and you have to come back, please.
Thank you very much. I'll be back.
Thank you.